Here we are back again, chapter 58 of A Child's History of the World, which is titled A Great Storyteller. Far away from England, far off in the direction of the rising sun, far beyond Italy and Jerusalem and the Tigris and the Euphrates and Persia, was a country called Cathay. C-A-T-H-A-Y. Cathay. If you look down at your feet and the world were glass, you would probably see Cathay on the other side. Cathay is the same place we now call China. There have been people living in Cathay, of course, all through the centuries that have passed. But Europeans knew little of this land or of its people. In the 19th century. In the 13th century, or 1200s, the Mongols, who came from the north, were ruling China. Soon it seemed that they might conquer all the other countries whose history we've been hearing about. The ruler of the Mongols was a fierce fighter named Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan had an army of Tartar horsemen who were terrific fighters. Genghis usually found some excuse for making war on others, but if he couldn't find a good excuse, he made one up. For he was bent on building an enormous empire. Genghis and his horsemen swept over the land from Cathay towards Europe. They burned and destroyed thousands upon thousands of towns and cities and everything in their way. No one was able to stop them. Genghis Khan had conquered the whole land from the Pacific Ocean to the eastern part of Europe. At last he was stopped. With this kingdom, he seemed to be satisfied. He might well have been satisfied, for it was larger than the Roman Empire or that of Alexander the Great. Even when Genghis Khan died, things were no better, for his son was just as fierce a fighter as his father and conquered still more territory. But the grandson of Genghis Khan was much less warlike than the grandfather had been. His name was Kublai Khan, and he was quite different from his father and grandfather. He made his capital at a city in China called Peiping, now called Beijing, and ruled over this vast empire that he had now inherited from his father. Kublai built magnificent palaces and surrounded himself with beautiful gardens, and he made such a wonderful capital for himself that King Solomon in all his glory did not live in such splendor as did Kublai Khan. Now, far, far off from Beijing and the palace of Kublai Khan, in the north of Europe, was a city built on the water. Its streets were of water, and the boats were used instead of carriages. This city was called Venice. About the year 1260, there were living in Venice two brothers named Nicola and Maffeo Polo. The Polos got an idea in their head that they would start off towards the rising sun looking for adventure, just like boys in storybooks who go off to seek their fortune. After several years of travel, always toward the east, they at last came to the gardens and to the magnificent palace of Kublai Khan. When Kublai Khan heard the strange white men from a far-off place in an unknown country or outside the palace, he wanted to see them. They were brought into his presence. They told Kublai Khan all about their own land. They were good storytellers, and they made it interesting. They told him all about the Christian religion and many other things that he had never heard of. After several years, the Polos went home to Venice. The emperor was so much interested in the Polos and in the stories they told about their country that he wanted to hear more. In 1271, the Polos returned to China with Nicola's teenage son, Marco. The emperor persuaded them to stay with him and tell him more. He gave them rich presents. Then he made them his advisors, and assistants in ruling the empire. The Polos stayed on for years and years and years and learned the language and came to be very important people in Cathay. At last, after they had spent about 20 years in Cathay, the Polos thought it was about time to go home and see their own people again. They begged leave to return. Kublai Khan did not want them to go. In the end, though, he did let them go, and they started back to what was once had been their home. When they at last arrived in Venice, they had been away so long and had been traveling so far that no one knew them. They had almost forgotten how to speak their own language, and they talked like foreigners. Their clothes had become worn out and ragged by their long trip. They looked like tramps, and not even their old friends recognized them. No one would believe that these ragged, dirty strangers were the same fine Venetian gentlemen who had disappeared almost 20 years before. The Polos told their townspeople all about their adventures in the wonderfully rich lands and cities that they had visited. The townspeople only laughed at them, for they thought them storytellers. The Polos then ripped open their garment bags, and out fell piles of magnificent and costly jewels, diamonds and rubies and sapphires, and pearls enough to buy a kingdom. The people looked in wonder and amazement and began to believe. Marco Polo told his story to a man who wrote them down and made a book of them called The Travels of Marco Polo. This is an interesting book for you to read even today, although we cannot believe all the tales he told. We know that he exaggerated a great many things, for he liked to amaze people. Marco Polo described the magnificence of Kublai Khan's palace. He told of its enormous dining halls, where thousands of guests could sit down at the table at one time. He told of a bird so huge that it could fly away with an elephant. He said that Noah's Ark was still on Mount Ararat, only the mountain was so high and so dangerous to climb on the amount of ice and snow with which it was covered that no one could go to see if the ark really was there. Well, all, we only have 2 chapters listed today, this week, so that's all I've got for you. Hope you have a lovely week. Ta-ta for now.